All right. So we're going to work with Act 3 here. And quickly, just to review, remember that Shakespearean structure has that 5-act arc. And what's important about it is that here in Act 3, as we started, we do have our climax in the middle of the work, as opposed to, that's not even at the top, opposed to sort of in the fiction that we are familiar with, whether it's books or TV or anything, we usually push the climax practically to the end of the work. And it doesn't give us a lot of time to discriminate between falling action and resolution. But Shakespeare does give himself the time. And what we see is that whatever happens here in the climax, that choice, that action, our falling action happens because of that. It's a direct result. And so we really can trace it, and it helps us to examine the meaning of the work as a whole, rather than it just being, oh, everything comes to a boil and then the end, like we get in more modern storytelling. So here's we begin it. We do want to see that we're over here still on this side. We are leading to the climax and setting things up. And this first section of Act 3 really kind of builds bridges and knits things together between what happened in Act 2 and what's going to happen here in Act 3. Let me get the audio set up, and we'll play that. You notice that we start off with the king and queen, with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, with Polonius, and, if we want to put some other people on stage too, that would be nice. Let's see here. Back it up.
Now I hear about the court, and as I think, they have already ordered this night.
This is the canoe that a young couple will get gloriously lost.
Can you, by no trick of circumstance, get from him why he puts on his confusion? Grating so harshly all his days of quiet with turbulent and dangerous lunacy.
He does confess he feels himself distracted, but from what cause he will by no means speak.
Nor do we find him forward to be sounded, but with a crafty madness keeps aloof when we would bring him on to some confession of his true state.
Did he receive you well?
Most like a gentleman.
But with much forcing of his disposition.
Niggard of question, but of our demands most free in his replies.
Did you assay him to any pastimes?
Madam, it so fell out that certain players we all brought on the way. Of these we told him, and there did seem in him a kind of joy to it. They are here about the court, and, as I think, they have already ordered this night to play before him.
It is most true, and he beseeched me to entreat your majesties to hear and see the matter.
With all my heart, and it doth much content me to hear him so inclined. Good gentlemen, give him a further edge, and drive his purpose on to these delights.
He shall, my lord.
Okay, so as he begins Act 3 here, what do you notice about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Because remember, this is kind of transition. So this is the first time we're seeing Rosencrantz and Guildenstern since they had the chance to talk to Hamlet. So they're reporting back here to the king and queen. What do they tell the king and queen about Hamlet?
Talk about him being off.
Yeah, they talk about him being off, but do they know why he's off?
No.
But they do.
Well,
that's the thing. They're telling the king and queen, he didn't tell us anything. We don't know. But they do know. He told them everything when he talked to them, which leaves us having to go, okay, there are two options here with these guys. Option one, they're just stupid. Like they're literally so dumb they didn't even realize it. They're like, oh, I don't know. I think it's a little too simple for what we get here. I think option 2 makes a little more sense. Remember that when we introduced Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Act 2, the king and queen offer them money. You know, that king's remembrance line comes up and they're like, we'll pay you to help us out here. Well, consider, you know, in your own sense, imagine somebody tells you, hey, I think this job is going to take you 5 hours, so I will pay you by the hour to do this, up to 5 hours. And then you turn around and look at it and you're done in 5 minutes. Do you go back to that person and say, no, it's cool. Like, I got it done in 5 minutes. Just pay me for 5 minutes? Or do you pretend to work for 4 hours and 55 minutes, drag the job out a little bit so that you can get the full money? We all know how to work slower. Come on. I see that look where you're like, no, I don't do that. Yeah, right. We all know how to do that. I think a better read would be to see that. They're not telling them because it's like, oh, well, if we keep working, we might get paid more. This is one of the opportunities that actors have in a Shakespearean work because of the lack of stage directions and specifics. They can delve in and look at, okay, there aren't a lot of specifics, so what do I notice? How can I play this a little bit different? And so it gives those opportunities, and really we can relate it from what we're doing because it's literary analysis. An actor's going to look at it by going, what's the character's motivation? What are they? We're going, what's in the text? What's literally here? And how can we make an argument for why these characters are doing this? And so that those analytical pieces are really important because they're scattered all throughout Act 3. And we're going to have lots of conversations about why this, why here, what's this, what can we do with it? The king is now going to turn his attention to the queen. And we're going to, again, pull something that we set up in Act 2 and carry it over here to Act 3. And so see if you can figure out what it is they're talking about.
Three curse will leave us to. But we have closely sensed by Hamlet, you know, that he, as to my accident, may yield but Ophelia. Her father and myself, lawful as vitals, will so bestow ourselves that seeing unseen, we may then encounter frankly judged, and gather by him as he is behaved, if be the affliction of his love, or no, that does he satisfy.
I shall obey you. And for your part, Ophelia, I do wish that your good duties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wives. So shall I hope your virtues will bring him to his wonted way, to both your honour.
Madam, I wish it may.
Okay, so as we get rid of the queen, what is the king saying they are going to go do?
Use Ophelia to figure out what's up with him.
Yes. So this was set up back in Act 2 when Polonius comes to get his gold star because Ophelius told him, hey, Hamlet was acting crazy. They come up with this plan. Hey, what about if we loose my daughter on him and we can spy on them? It's phrased here in this interesting oxymoron with them being lawful espials. You know, a lawful spy, that doesn't seem to work too well. It does. So they're getting ready to get set up. As the queen leaves, notice that her lines are really direct because she's saying, hey, I hope it's your fault. In her sense. I hope he really, he's crazy because he loves you and that's it. Because she doesn't want it to be her. I don't want to be the reason that my son's nuts. I'm going to stupid. They're going to set things up here. Polonius is going to give some direction, but notice that the king's lines here on the bottom of the page are an aside, spoken out loud, but not heard by the other characters on stage, as though they're an externalization of his interior thoughts. Pay attention here because they are super important. And don't flip the page yet. We'll get to the bottom of the page, but keep it here so we can discuss.
Ophelia, walk you here. Gracious, so please you, we will bestow ourselves. Read on this book, that show of such an exercise may cover your loneliness. We are oft to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself.
Oh, 'tis too true. How smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most dainty word. Oh, heavy burden.
I hear him coming. Let's withdraw, my lord.
Okay, so what do you take away from the king's lines here that are an aside? All right, let's bump it back up. So once Polonius gives his daughter direction, like, hey, here's a book, go read, pretend to be distracted. He turns to Claudius and he talks about we, now including he and Claudius, kind of in cahoots. We are off to blame in this. Now, he's not necessarily talking about this is our fault, as much as I think he's using it like fathers, adults, males are often to blame for how these things go, because 'tis too much proved that with devotion's visage, and over on the side you see an outward show of religious fervor, and pious action, pious of course being religious or faithful action, we sugar over the devil himself. They try to do good things, but ultimately the good things that they're doing are really covering over the devil's work, the bad things, the sinful things. Hey, we're trying to figure out what's wrong with Hamlet, but you know what? Maybe we're doing more harm than good. We're trying to do good things, but maybe we're just covering up bad things with it. Pretty generic statement. But notice that the king takes it like a sting. It hits him a different way. Because he starts with that, oh, 'tis too true. How smart a lash that speak doth give my conscience. What would be the thing that would be bothering Claudius's conscience? Yeah, that he killed someone, like his brother. But the whole idea of this stinging his conscience really hinges on the idea of Claudius even having a conscience. We're 3 acts deep into this, and this is the first moment that we see any kind of regret or sadness or even attrition for what he's done. But this is our indication as audience that he's guilty. Remember, Hamlet's looking for this confirmation. He wants to make sure that Claudius is guilty. But Shakespeare gives us this quick moment here to go, trust me, dude. Trust me, my dudes. He's guilty. We've got it. So when he talks about the heavy burden, he's looking at this burden of having to carry around this sin that he's done. But much like Claudius's comments, or much like Polonius's comments, Claudius kind of rephrases it. He talks about a harlot here. The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastered art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Well, why does a harlot, a loose woman, whatever word you want to use, why does she wear lots of makeup? Because she wants to attract men to do bad things. Well, think about what he's done. He's done a bad thing, but here he's got these words, as he says, my painted word. Look at how he puts himself out there as king, as ruler. Look at what he's gained through this action. And so we're setting up some things we're going to deal with on the back end of Act 3 once we hit the climax. But this is your moment to know, yes, he's guilty. Now, when we flip the page, you see the speech and you go, oh, I know this speech. It's from Hamlet. Today we finally get to the to be or not to be soliloquy. As we read it, the first thing I want you to do is jettison out any assumptions you might have from having previously heard lines of this out in the general public. Everybody knows this line. Everybody thinks that they have an understanding of what this is or how it should be taken. I want you to approach it as, hey, here are the words on the page. Let's see what's really here. we're going to play the audio. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just process and use the notes before we kind of discuss through where are we at. But consider for a moment where we're at. We are pre-climax in Act 3. We are still on the rising action end. And if we look at kind of mapping it, here at the end of Act 1, our inciting incident to push us into our rising action was that Hamlet decided to put on the antic disposition to find the truth. He's acted crazy through Act 2 in order to try to find out what's going on. And by the end of Act 2, makes a decision that I'm going to have this play presented as a way to verify what I've been told. So not only does he have plans and goals, but we see those things kind of working through, ultimately to lead to, I'm going to have to take action. I'm going to have to put this revenge in place and kill my uncle. So we want to be in Hamlet's headspace as he enters here, because he's going to process all of this in the course of this speech. So I'll play the audio. I'll give you a few minutes to just kind of look and read and use the notes, and then we'll discuss.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. It is a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, to sleep. A chance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fathers bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
All right, so take a couple of minutes, use the notes, kind of reframe, see where it is. Because consider, these soliloquies are written to be like beginning, middle, end. So here you have a posed question, an examination, and then a conclusion. So, what are your takeaways here? Like, here's a speech that has transcended the work. People that don't even know Hamlet know at least that beginning line. Why? Like, what do you think is so important about this? How does it like speak to the moment in the play? What do you take away from it? Or is it kind of like staring at this majestic mountain that everybody's like, oh, this is so beautiful, and you're just like, I just don't get it.
It's like anytime someone contemplates like their life,
Mm-hmm.
it can be seen differently. And it's a time issue, I guess, too, to where it's not easily like you read it and you're like, oh, I see exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's things that you can write just like is like death being the eternal sleep. And it's like, well, you dream in your living sleep, like what happens when you die? Like what do you see things when you die too? Like that can be seen as part of that.
No, I think that's a definite thing to pick up on. It's the uncertainty of what comes next, I mean, in a world that we have so many answers, it's one of the few things that nobody can know. And even, there's that like little kid that was like, I died once and I wrote a book. Like, even he doesn't know. Like, as much as people might be like, he has the answer. We don't know that. And it's that uncertainty, that chance of not is what hits him here. Because we think we know, but it's like, I mean, for me personally, like we all have that moment that we think about the fact that we're all going to die, right? That our mortality comes in. I guarantee you've had this moment. We all do. We get really dark for about 15 seconds because you're just like, oh my God, one day I'm going to die. What's it going to be like? How's that going to happen? Oh my God. And then we laugh it off. We like brush it off. We're almost like, I'm immortal. I'm fine. I don't need to worry about that. Like it just disappears. But we all have it. We're all faced with that concept that's there. And I think for Hamlet, it's intrinsic into what this speech is. And where a lot of people will misread is they assume this speech is about suicide. But if we go back to our plot diagram, it makes no sense. Why would Hamlet, who is seeking out this truth and who has developed plans and has ideas, why would he all of a sudden come into Act 3 and be like, I want to kill myself? I mean, I know I said think about him like an emo kid, but this is even a little much to do that. I think instead we should lean into the abstract quality of the state of the question that starts it, to be or not to be. And it becomes that question of, well, what is it that he's asking? And I think a better way to frame it is to act or not to act. He knows at this moment, I'm going to figure out if Claudius is guilty. I have a plan for that. But it's, what do I do next? And should I bother to wait all this time, or should I act right? Should I do it? Because if you look at the next couple of lines, as he starts to ponder this question, he thinks, is it nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Well, consider what he is dealing with. Dead father, a ghost comes back to tell him the truth. And the only thing he can think to do is to pretend to be crazy. So he's dealing with everybody's judgment. He's dealing with his own self-doubt. He's dealing with the absurd nature of this. He is literally under assault from all this. Is it better to deal with these things or take up the arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them? Do I just take action and make it happen? Because if you think about his logical progression here, if he just killed Claudius, what would likely happen to him?
I mean, Claudius is the king right now. So
Exactly. So if you kill the king, what's going to happen to you?
probably.
You're going to get killed. So if you choose to take an action that you know is going to end in your own death, in some ways, couldn't you view that as suicide in the abstract? And if he's taking so much time to avoid sin, I want to make sure that Claudius is actually guilty so that if I do kill him, it doesn't fall on my head. You can see why he's worried about the concept here of this abstract suicide. I don't know if that's what I want to do. And so as he starts to go through all of these ideas about sleep and death and, you know, the dreams that come and all that, the middle part really comes to, it's what makes, you know, he says, you know, there's the respect that makes calamity of so long a life. Hamlet again opens this by thinking about having to deal with the crap of reality. And for those people that choose to live through life, he's almost like, God, these people have to deal with. And he goes through all these things: the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the insults, the pangs of despisal of the law's delay, all of these issues that we all have to deal with through existence. When he says, when you can just end it by picking up a bear bodkin, a knife, put an end to it. And so he comes to that thing of, you know, again, it's the dread of what comes after death. That's what stops people from doing it. And by the time he hits line 83, he's thought about it, but he's come to his conclusion. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. Is he going to take action? Yes or no? If his thought there is to say then, thus conscience does make cowards of us all. No. He's concerned about what could happen after death more so than the rest. That's what's going to stop him. We notice we bring up that conscious word again, the same word that Claudius uttered just a second ago to talk about how it's the hit on his conscience. We questioned, well, does he have one? And here we don't even think to ask that question about Hamlet. We know that he does. We know that he's grounded in these things. And so here, whereas with Claudius we had this sense of guilt, here for Hamlet, that moment of his conscience produces shame. He's full of it. I should be wanting to take action. I should be full of emotion like the player was. I should have these pieces, but instead I keep not doing it. I keep stopping myself. I keep asking the questions. Ugh! And so he gets frustrated there. And he loses the name of action here in this moment. I think it's important because if you think about Hamlet here, for Hamlet, heroism in this moment would require direct action. But here with this, he understands that the cost of that action is death, and it's a price he's not willing to pay. And so really it kind of puts all of this ideal of heroism and what he thinks he should do into it. And if you look at where we're going to now introduce Ophelia into this, who is essentially like Hamlet's ex. So consider you're in a moment that you've had a chance to think, and coming away from it, you end up being full of shame. And then your ex decides to show up and want to talk to you. Is that going to end nicely? Oh no, it's just awful, terrible. Do we want to even begin this today, or are you guys just like, ugh? You? No, we got like 6, but I'm willing to say 1. We have 1 minute. It's a first day back.